Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. أما بعد أحبتي في الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته أسأل الله كريم رب العرش العظيم أن يتولنا في الدنيا والآخرة. أحبتي في الله, as I've mentioned prior on numerous occasions, there were many detractors from Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab rahmatullahi alayhi, many people who went against him or hated him, and throughout history. From the various, predominantly from various ideologies and sects. So the Shia, of course, many of the people of Tasawwuf from their different levels. There's people who are very extreme in their Tasawwuf, where meaning they're so extreme they're outside the fold of Islam because they believe in worshiping dead people and things like this, and coming closer to Allah through this. And this is evidenced in their books and fatwa, so we don't need to exaggerate. And then you have the other groups that might be more oriented towards, groups such as Ikhwan Muslimin or other groups and sects, Jamaat Tabligh, others like this. And so you have a variety of detractors, but during his time and after his time, was quite a few detractors, and if we get a chance, we'll go through some, but we'll go through a few statements here. So amongst some of the detractors within the Islamic community, you have those who attribute takfir and Khawarij characteristics to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, rahmatullahi alayhi. So it's very important for us to first get in some context. The Khawarij were one of the first sects in Islam, and they were a sect who the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam described by saying, Al-Khawarij kilab an-nar. The Khawarij are the dogs of the hellfire. And in another narration, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the Khawarij, that they would recite the Quran. And of course, they pray and they fast. And your fasting, and he was talking to the Sahaba, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, your fasting would seem like nothing compared to their fasting. And your prayer would seem like nothing compared to their prayer. So it means they were very good in outwardly perfecting their ibadah. However, the Quran would not pass beyond their throats. So meaning they didn't really have, as the scholars mentioned, true knowledge, ilm. They were jahil, and they were extreme. They had a ghulu, and they were violent, and that's kind of been the trend throughout history. And they fought the Sahaba to Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, and killed some Sahaba, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. And these were traits of the original sect. So later day groups took these, inherited some of these traits from their own ideologies. And some of the detractors of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, rather, we could probably safely say almost all of his detractors, people who criticize him, almost always use this same critique. For example, there was a scholar in Mecca. His name was Ahmed Dahlan, and he was one of the major criticizers of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. He lived about 50 years after he died, rahmatullahi alayhi. And he wrote a book called Fitna to Wahhabiyya, the trial of the Wahhabiyya, the fitna, meaning that the Wahhabis, that they we're like the Khawarij, and he had all kind of claims in here, and we'll just get to some of these claims because that's really the crux of our sitting now. But I just wanted to get some context that most of the detractors, if not all, I haven't found any detractors of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab that don't really make some of these same claims, that he was extreme, that they fought and killed the Muslims, this and that and the other. Okay, so amongst some of the detractors within the Islamic community, you have those who attribute takfir and Khawarij characteristics to Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab. One such critic, Abu Zahra, said, they, meaning those who follow Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahab, resemble the Khawarij, who used to declare disbelief upon those who committed major sins. Now, I'm going to just talk about each of these critiques because that's a blatant lie. The research, the evidence shows us totally contrary to that. And his own words, you can go to his own books, even those people who are detractors up to this day, go to his books and you'll find what he says about those people he disagreed with. He did not make takfir for disagreeing with him, but rather takfir, it has conditions. And it has what are known as mu'ana. It has prohibitors to making takfir. So that means there's conditions before you can make takfir on a specific individual. So takfir is of two types. Takfir mutlaq wa takfir al-ma'yan. Takfir mutlaq meaning the general takfir. So for example, if you say whoever makes prostration to an idol, this person is disbelieved. That's called in general. That's a general wasf, a general description of someone doing an issue, an act of disbelief. Takfir al-ma'yan has to do when you are implementing that hukum, that ruling of kufr, upon a specific individual. Now, I want to also preface this by saying that is not for everyone. That's not for you and I to make those judgments. These are for scholars. And more importantly, even more over than scholars, really these are for Islamic judges, and Islamic judges should be well versed in knowledge. Obviously, they're not just like in the West where they, know constitutional law and this and that. No, the Islamic judges have to know Sharia law. So they have to know and have to have, knowledge and fiqh and insight, and balance, and have to be just and pious individuals, especially when it comes to making these adjudications against individuals. So that means everyone doesn't have a role. And Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab realized this. And Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab, rahmatullahi alayhi, he mentions in his books, you'll find a lot of issues about, he talks about the conditions for takfir, and he talks about the mu'ani, the prohibitors, the takfir, things like being the excuse of ignorance or the excuse of ta'wil, of misconstruing and misinterpretation, or obviously from the mu'ani of takfir is also if someone is, they don't have their intellect anymore, they've lost sanity or what have you. So he talks about these things and details this, and you'll find this in a lot of his treatises. And he even mentions about those individuals who actually were doing bid'ah mukaffara, who he didn't make takfir of, until, which is also a condition for takfir, that you have to, iqamatul hujjah, that you have to establish the proof on the individual mukhalif, the people or the person who is doing acts or has a belief or has statements of disbelief. So that means these conditions need to be in a place. It's a very delicate and sensitive matter. These are not things that ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and other groups take into consideration. They are extremists who resemble the Khawarij, the original sect, who did not give any, they just made takfir of those who disagreed with him, and amongst other things, and spilled their blood. So Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab was far removed from that. That's the first thing, is very important from this claim. And as far as the major sins, absolutely, this is a lie. This is a fabrication, batil, because he even wrote a book called Kaba'ir, the major sins, and talks about, in his treatises about the aqidah of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, the creed of Ahlul Sunnah, which is that people who do major sins and they die upon those sins, we say they are tahta mashiyatillah. They're at the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Insha'Allah yu'adhibuhum wa insha'Allah yaghfirhum. If Allah wills, He will excuse them, and if Allah wills, He will punish them. So we say tahta mashiyah, and then you'll find this in the classical books. This belief. This is what we refer to as a tenet or a part of the creed of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And so, with that being the case, we have to know and understand that takfir is not a light matter, and Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab did not take it as a light matter, and he did not make takfir of people for major sins. That's just a plain lie there. But rather, he believed in establishing the proof, the hujjah, and giving evidence, and he wrote books to do that, such as Usul al-Thalatha and Qawaid al-Arba, Kashf al-Shubahat, and things like this. These are some of his books, Kitab al-Tawheed, in order to establish the proof and remind the people, remind other scholars who defended grave worship and seeking refuge or seeking or hoping or isti'ana or seeking help from the dead or dead saints or saints that weren't present or, whatever the case they may be, or seeking blessings from trees. He, established the proof and sent the message to the people before things had escalated until, reaching the level of jihad fi sabilillah. Because when someone leaves the fold of Islam, of course that would be a type of jihad fi sabilillah. That is not a case of Muslims fighting Muslims because of bid'ah mukaffara, bid'ah which takes you out of the fold of Islam. Some of the other claims against him, Asawi, who's an American academic scholar, whatever, Ikhwani, Asawi claimed, while explaining a verse from the Quran, that this verse was revealed about the Khawarij, who distorted and misinterpreted the book and the Sunnah. That's true about the Khawarij. And then he said, and made lawful the blood and wealth of Muslims. That's what the Khawarij did. He said, like his witness in a group similar to them called the Wahhabis. There's where he went astray in his analysis. Ibn al-Afalak, or something like this, said regarding Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said, by Allah, he lied upon the messengers and judged them and their communities with polytheism. This is a lie. He didn't make takfir and say that the Anbiya, alayhim afdal salatu wasalam, made shirk. He didn't criticize them. Rather, he, had the pristine aqeedah of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, realizing that the Anbiya are the best of humankind. They received revelation from Allah, and they were the example for us. And with the last of them being the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So a lot of these were lies and fabrications and things that people had heard, because you got to remember, especially during the time that many of these individuals lived, who criticized, that knowledge would be, it would just be what was related to them, from others. And and then a certain scholar wrote a refutation. And so people took these beliefs rather than actually what they had experienced, or now compared to the sources of media and the levels of accuracy that we can have are much more complete. Now, and so, he began by saying, by Allah, he swore by Allah, he lied upon the messenger. So this shows you that many of the people, they really felt, so far against Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab, like he was a demon, his revival to Tawheed and so forth. And that's why you can find so much animosity even today, because these issues had to do with bid'ah mukaffara, bid'ah which takes you out of the fold of Islam, and the issue of takfir and things like this. So it had quite heavy implications of the differing that took place. He said, and then their animosities can be summed up in a single statement narrated from amongst the many enemies of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab, who said, you have expelled the whole nation from the religion. That's a lie. And expelled those who did not utter a saying of misguidance or disbelief. Another lie. False claim. And you made lawful their blood, wealth, and progeny. Another lie and exaggeration. And you said to a people who have been upon the religion 600 years that they are upon nothing. You made it a condition upon whoever wants to join your religion that he bear witness upon himself and his parents that they were disbelievers. So this is amazing, the claims, but you can see how when people begin to fabricate and exaggerate, they'll say anything to support their ideology, to support their claims. It doesn't have to be based in fact or truth or actual quotes. What did the Imam say? What does he say in his books? Things like this. No, the people are emotional, and they just couldn't understand why bid'ah mukaffara, why you can't worship the snow or a dog or a pig or a donkey or a broken toenail, why they can't sing blessings from the broken toenail of a saint. People, this is the amazing thing about the children of Adam, and regardless of whether they say La ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah or not, is people can be reduced to the lowest level and fall into the shirkiyat practices. People have always worshipped just about everything, from the sun, the moon, the stars, rats. Look at the Hindus. There's Hindus that holy temples that are just swarming with rats. I've seen that with my own eyes on TV anyway, where they were feeding the rats. And they said that all those rats, they're gods. So he has to feed his gods, those filthy vermin. And cows, people worship pigs. People worship phallic symbols. People worship. There's nothing that people don't find a way to worship. And for example, Allah says in the Quran, ومن آياته الليل والنهار والشمس والقمر لا تسجدوا للشمس ولا للقمر واسجدوا لله الذي خلقهن إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. So that shows us that people would no doubt be reduced. Of course, that's the pagans, but the people, there are so many people from Ahl Islam who follow that same sunnah, that they may not worship the sun, but rather they'll go to a grave and supplicate and say, so-and-so help me. And so-and-so save me, so-and-so make my wife pregnant, so-and-so this, so-and-so that. So the people go far away from Islam. And to go to the ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ اللَّيْلُ وَالنَّهَارُ, from his signs, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's signs, is the sun and the moon. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ اللَّيْلُ وَالنَّهَارُ, the night and the day. وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ, and the sun and the moon. لَا تَسْجُدُوا لِلشَّمْسِ, do not prostrate to the sun. وَلَا لِلْقَمَرِ, nor to the moon. وَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ الَّذِي خَلَقَهُنَّ, worship Allah, the one who created them. إِن كُنتُمْ إِيَّاهُ تَعْبُدُونَ, if it is him alone you truly worship. So that really sums up and gives us insight. Actually, what the Dawa of Muhammad of the Wahab is purifying. It's based on the Quran and the Sunnah, purifying the deviancy of people who had reduced to idol worship and sanctification and veneration of the saints to the level of ubudiyah, servitude. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that we should worship the one who created those signs. Those are signs. We call those ayat kawniyah. Those are ayat, signs in the creation to show that there's only one God worthy of worship, and that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the only one worthy of worship. And that means we can't prostrate. We can't do all these other acts of ibadah to anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is in light of what Sheikh Muhammad ibn Wahab rahmatullahi alayhi, his da'wah was based on that, the call to tawheed, the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all worship is directed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine names and attributes that we should supplicate to him by, not to the saints, not going to the graves, not trying to pray in a certain place that hasn't been detailed in the Sharia about that place, its sanctity, and doing all these false pilgrimages and stuff like this. And this is where the people had gone astray. And Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Wahab, his dawah, was trying to revive and purify the deen and what was attributed and associated with the deen. That was false. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the Almighty to accept our good and forgive our evil. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.